Everyone at the vampire palace thought she was worthless. A human. A nobody. Something to mock or destroy. So when Brilliant walked into the throne hall that night, trembling, bleeding, humiliated, the nobles laughed. They thought she'd finally broken. They thought the king would ignore her the way he ignored all humans. But then the impossible happened. The entire hall fell silent. Because the vampire king, the same ancient monster who once slaughtered a village for disrespecting him, the same king who swore he would never touch, protect, or even look at a human, appeared behind her in a blur of black fire and rage. His eyes weren't their usual crimson. They were glowing gold, the color of a wolf recognizing its mate. Gasps echoed through the hall. Nobles stumbled backward, suddenly terrified. And when Brilliant tried to step away from him, thinking she'd done something wrong, thinking she wasn't worthy, the king reached out, wrapped his hand around her shaking wrist, pulled her gently, too gently, against his chest, and said words that shattered every rule in existence. Mock her again. Breathe wrong in her direction, and I will rip out your hearts myself. A collective panic rippled through the palace. This wasn't just protection. This wasn't kindness. This was claim. This was bond. This was obsession carved into eternity. Brilliant stared up at him, trembling. Why? She whispered. They said you hated humans. And the vampire king. The creature feared across realms, leaned down, touched her cheek like she was sacred, and confessed the one truth that could start a war. I don't hate humans. I hate anyone who thinks they can touch what's mine. Then, before his court, before centuries of laws, before every shocked and furious noble, he did the unthinkable, the forbidden, the world-ending. He pulled Brilliant into the crook of his arm, turned toward his people, and declared, "Bow to your future queen." The grand doors of the vampire palace closed behind Brilliant with a sound like a coffin sealing shut. She stood in the entrance hall, clutching her worn leather satchel against her chest, trying not to tremble. The marble floors gleamed like black ice beneath her feet. Crimson tapestries hung from walls so high they disappeared into shadow. Everything here was designed to remind visitors of one simple truth: you are small, and we are eternal. Brilliant had known this wouldn't be easy. When the High Council announced they were accepting human healers into their training program, her mother had begged her not to go. "They'll tear you apart," she'd whispered, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Vampires don't see us as people. We're food to them. Toys." But Brilliant had skills that were rare even among her own kind. Her healing touch could mend wounds that resisted magic. Her knowledge of ancient herbs could cure blood poisoning that left vampire physicians baffled. She'd thought, naively perhaps, that talent would be enough. She'd been wrong. Well, what do we have here? 3 vampire courtiers materialized from the shadows, moving with that unnatural grace that made Brilliant's stomach clench. They circled her like wolves examining wounded prey. The tallest one, a woman with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice, leaned close enough that Brilliant could smell the copper tang of recent feeding on her breath. Human trash in the palace. How? Quaint. "I'm here for the healing program," Brilliant managed, hating how small her voice sounded in this cavernous space. "I have my acceptance letter." "Oh, we know why you're here." A male vampire with cruel, beautiful features plucked the letter from her trembling hands. He made a show of reading it, then let it flutter to the floor like garbage. "The question is why the council thought we needed human filth walking our halls." Weak. The third vampire, younger looking but with ancient eyes, circled behind her. Pathetic. "Look how she shakes." Brilliant bent to retrieve her letter, her cheeks burning with shame. "Don't cry," she told herself fiercely. "Don't give them the satisfaction." But her eyes were already beginning to shine with unshed tears, and she knew they could see it. Vampires saw everything. "I heard the king himself despises humans," the silver-haired woman said, though her eyes never left Brilliant's face. She was watching for a reaction, savoring it. "Calls them walking blood bags. Barely worth the effort of hunting." The words struck like physical blows. Brilliant had heard the rumors about King Brown, whispered in fearful tones by humans who lived near the border. He was ancient, powerful, and utterly merciless. Some said he'd once raised an entire human village for daring to refuse him tribute. Others claimed he kept human pets in cages, drinking from them until they were hollow shells. Maybe she's hoping to warm the king's bed, the male vampire suggested with a vicious laugh. Offer herself up like a good little blood doll. With that plain face? Those dull eyes. The silver-haired woman's laugh was like breaking glass. She'd bore him in minutes. Then he'd drain her dry and toss her body to the hounds. Brilliant's hands shook as she smoothed out her crumpled letter. The parchment was damp where her tears had fallen despite her best efforts. She wanted to run. She wanted to turn around and flee back through those massive doors, back to the human territories where people at least pretended to be kind. But she'd made a promise. To her mother. To herself. To all the humans who'd scraped together their meager coins to fund her training, hoping she might return with knowledge that could save their children from the fevers that swept through their villages every winter. "Excuse me," she whispered, trying to move past them toward the corridor she'd been directed to in her orientation letter. The male vampire's hand shot out, gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. "Did we say you could leave, human? Please." The word came out broken. "I just want to get to my quarters." Listen to it beg. The ancient-eyed one moved closer. That's all humans are good for, really. Begging. Bleeding. Breaking. What Brilliant didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that high above in the king's tower, King Brown stood at his window, watching the scene unfold in the entrance hall below. His fingers gripped the stone windowsill hard enough to crack it. He'd been drawn to this window by something he couldn't name, some instinct that whispered danger and desire in equal measure. And then he'd seen her. The soft-spoken girl with frightened eyes, trying so hard to be brave while his courtiers tore her apart with words as sharp as fangs. Her scent reached him even from this distance, carried on currents of magic that wove through the palace. Wildflowers and rain-soaked earth. Clean linen and something sweeter, something that made his centuries-old hunger stir in a way that had nothing to do with blood. He watched her tremble. Watched her fight back tears. Watched her square her shoulders despite the fear rolling off her in waves. And something in his chest, something he'd thought long dead, twisted painfully. "Your Majesty?" His advisor's voice came from behind him. "The council awaits your..." "Leave me." The words came out rougher than he'd intended. Below, the girl finally broke free from his courtiers and hurried down the corridor, practically running. He could see the tears streaming down her face now, no longer hidden. King Brown's jaw clenched. He should feel nothing. Humans were beneath him. He'd said as much countless times, had built his fearsome reputation on the idea that mortals were tools to be used and discarded. But watching her disappear into the shadows of the palace, he felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries. Guilt. And beneath that, even more troubling, the inexplicable need to follow her. To find her. To make her understand that she wasn't what they'd called her. That somehow, impossibly, she was something far more dangerous than either of them could imagine. 3 weeks had passed since Brilliant arrived at the palace, and nothing had improved. She'd learned to keep her head down, to make herself small and invisible in the corridors. She ate her meals alone in the servants' kitchen after the vampires had finished, picking at cold food while the cook pretended not to notice her red-rimmed eyes. At night, she studied her healing texts by candlelight in her tiny chamber, memorizing herb properties and bone-setting techniques until exhaustion finally pulled her into restless sleep. But the mocking never stopped. If anything, it had grown worse. "The human pet is still here," they'd whisper loud enough for her to hear. "I thought she'd have run home crying by now. Give her time. They always break." Lady Crimson, the silver-haired vampire who'd tormented her that first day, seemed to take particular pleasure in Brilliant's misery. She'd trip her in hallways, correct her healing techniques in front of instructors, making her feel stupid and worthless. Once, she'd accidentally knocked over Brilliant's carefully prepared tinctures, destroying a week's worth of work. Brilliant endured it all in silence, because what choice did she have? So when Lady Crimson approached her in the library one evening with something that almost resembled friendliness, Brilliant's first instinct was suspicion. Brilliant. The vampire's voice was honey-sweet. I wanted to apologize for my behavior. Brilliant looked up from her text on blood purification, wary. You did. I was cruel. Unnecessarily so. Lady Crimson settled gracefully into the chair across from her, surrounded by 3 other noble vampires. We're not used to humans here, and I let prejudice cloud my judgment. You've proven yourself quite dedicated to your studies. The words were everything Brilliant had desperately wanted to hear. Some acknowledgement that she belonged here, that her efforts mattered. She felt a dangerous flutter of hope in her chest. Thank you, she said softly. That means a great deal. In fact, I'd like to help you. Lady Crimson leaned forward, her ice blue eyes glittering in the candlelight. There's a test tomorrow for all healing students. A practical examination of herb knowledge. But I can tell you exactly what will be asked. Brilliant's heart skipped. She'd heard about the test, had been terrified she'd fail it. Why would you help me? Consider it my apology. Lady Crimson smiled, showing just a hint of fong. All you need to do is fetch a few herbs from the eastern courtyard tonight. Moonbell and shadow root. They're rare, and having them prepared ahead of time will impress the examiners tremendously. The eastern courtyard? Brilliant had never been there, but she'd heard whispers about it. Nothing specific, just an undercurrent of unease when it was mentioned. It's a bit overgrown, but the herbs grow wild there. Lady Crimson waved a dismissive hand. You'll need to go just before moonrise, though. That's when they're most potent. Their healing properties peak in twilight. The other vampires nodded in agreement, their faces sympathetic and encouraging. Brilliant wanted to believe them so badly it hurt. She was exhausted from being alone, from being hated. The idea that she might finally have allies, that someone might actually want to help her, was almost irresistible. I don't know, she said hesitantly. I'm not supposed to go to the courtyards after dark. Oh, that rule is for guests, not students. Lady Crimson stood, smoothing her silk gown. But if you'd rather fail tomorrow's test and prove everyone right about weak humans, by all means, stay here with your books. The jab hit its mark. Brilliant closed her text, her jaw set with determination she didn't quite feel. Tell me exactly where to find them. Lady Crimson's smile widened. The eastern courtyard was nothing like Brilliant had imagined. The other courtyards she'd seen were maintained, beautiful in their Gothic severity. This one had been left to rot. Dead vines crawled up crumbling stone walls. Statues stood broken and weather-worn, their faces eroded into blank nightmares. The air itself felt wrong, heavy and cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Brilliant clutched her gathering basket tighter, trying to ignore the way her instincts screamed at her to run. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and bruise. She'd arrived just before moonrise, exactly as instructed. Now she knelt among the overgrown herbs, searching desperately for moonbell and shadow root by the fading light. Her hands shook as she worked. Every shadow seemed to move. Every whisper of wind sounded like breathing. She'd just found a cluster of shadow root when she heard it. Laughter. Brilliant's head snapped up. There, on the wall overlooking the courtyard, stood Lady Crimson and her companions. Their expressions weren't sympathetic anymore. They were delighted, expectant, like children waiting for a puppet show to begin. Did you really think we wanted to help you? Lady Crimson called down, her voice ringing with cruel amusement. Stupid human. There is no test tomorrow. Cold understanding flooded through Brilliant. Why would you? The blood shades wake at moonrise, one of the other vampires interrupted, practically bouncing with excitement. They haven't fed in weeks. The eastern courtyard is where we keep them contained. Blood shades. Brilliant had read about them in her texts. Shadow creatures that fed on life force itself, leaving nothing but dried husks behind. They were nearly impossible to kill, drawn to fear and warmth and beating hearts. Please. Brilliant stood on trembling legs, backing toward the courtyard entrance. Please let me out. Oh no. We want to see how long you last. Lady Crimson's laugh was bright and terrible. Consider it a different kind of test. The king always says humans are worthless. Let's see if he's right. The moon crested the horizon, and the shadows began to move. They rose from the ground itself, formless and hungry, darker than the darkness around them. Brilliant could feel them pulling at her, cold fingers of nothing trying to drink her warmth, her life, her very existence. She ran. But there was nowhere to go. The courtyard walls were too high, the gates sealed. The shades were everywhere, multiplying, converging on her like a tide of living darkness. Brilliant's scream tore through the night, raw and desperate and utterly terrified. Above on the wall, the vampires laughed and laughed. But in the king's tower, King Brown's head snapped up at a sound that made his ancient blood run cold. A human girl's scream. Her scream. And then he was moving, faster than thought, faster than mercy, his mind filled with one terrible certainty. If she died tonight, something in him would die with her. The blood shades were closing in, their cold touch already stealing the warmth from Brilliant's skin when the world exploded. A force like a hurricane slammed into the courtyard. The ancient stones cracked. The air itself seemed to scream. And then he was there, King Brown, descending from the tower wall in a blur of darkness and barely contained rage. His eyes blazed crimson gold, a color Brilliant had never seen in any vampire. The light they cast was terrible and beautiful, illuminating the courtyard like twin suns made of fire and blood. This was no ordinary vampire lord. This was something older, something that made even the blood shades recoil. He moved through them like death incarnate. His hand swept out and shadows disintegrated, their dying shrieks like whined through broken glass. Another gesture and 3 more shades simply ceased to exist, unraveled at a molecular level by power Brilliant couldn't comprehend. He didn't use weapons. He didn't need to. He was the weapon, ancient and terrible, violence given form. The entire courtyard cleared in seconds. Then King Brown turned, and Brilliant saw his face properly for the first time. He was beautiful in the way cathedrals were beautiful, imposing, otherworldly, designed to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. Dark hair fell across a face carved from marble and moonlight. His features were sharp enough to cut, aristocratic and cruel. But those eyes, still glowing with that strange crimson gold light, held something that didn't match the rumors she'd heard. They held devastation. He crossed the distance between them in an instant. Brilliant tried to stand, to prove she wasn't weak, wasn't pathetic like they all said. But her legs wouldn't hold her. She'd lost too much life force to the shades. The world tilted sideways, and she was falling. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. King Brown lifted her like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest with a gentleness that contradicted everything about his violent entrance. One hand supported her back, the other beneath her knees, and he held her like she was made of spun glass, like she was something precious he'd found after searching for centuries. "I have you." His voice was rough, barely controlled. "You're safe now." Brilliant's mind couldn't process what was happening. This was the king who despised humans, the monster from 1,000 whispered horror stories. But his hands were steady and warm, and he was holding her like she mattered. Like she was worth saving. "Your Majesty." Lady Crimson's voice came from the wall, suddenly uncertain. "We were merely testing the human's fortitude. A bit of harmless." King Brown's head snapped up, and the look he gave the assembled nobles made them flinch backward. His eyes were still glowing, still that impossible crimson gold that spoke of power beyond anything they'd imagined. The hybrid color. Some vampires whispered about it in dark corners, the mark of ancient bloodlines mixing, creating something stronger and infinitely more dangerous than pure vampire nobility. Harmless. The word dripped with venom. You sent her into a den of bloodshades and call it harmless? "She's just a human," one of the other nobles ventured, then immediately wished he hadn't spoken. The temperature in the courtyard plummeted. Frost formed on the broken stones. The very air felt heavy with the king's rage, a physical presence that made it hard to breathe. "Just a human," King Brown repeated softly. dangerously. He looked down at Brilliant, still trembling in his arms, blood seeping from where the shades had touched her. Her eyes were wide with shock and pain, but also confusion. She was staring at him like she couldn't reconcile what she was seeing with what she'd been told about him. It made something crack in his chest. He'd spent weeks watching her from the shadows. Weeks telling himself he didn't care, that his fascination was merely curiosity about an oddity in his court. He'd convinced himself the pull he felt toward her was just the novelty of her scent, her innocence in a place that had forgotten what innocence looked like. But seeing her about to die, hearing her scream, had stripped away every lie he'd told himself. She wasn't just a human. She was his human. And they'd tried to kill her. King Brown's gaze swept across the nobles, each word falling like an executioner's blade. Touch her again, mock her again, put her in danger again. He paused, letting the weight of what he was about to say settle over them. And I will rip out your hearts with my bare hands. I will make it slow. I will make you beg. And I will smile while you die. Absolute silence. In 5 centuries of rule, King Brown had never made such a declaration. Never threatened his nobles over anyone, let alone a human. They stared at him in shock, trying to understand what had shifted, what invisible line had been crossed. Why? Lady Crimson whispered. She's nothing. A human girl who doesn't belong here. She belongs here because I say she belongs here. King Brown's arms tightened fractionally around Brilliant, careful not to hurt her even as fury radiated from every line of his body. And if you question that again, Crimson, I'll remember that you were the one who orchestrated this little test. Fear flickered across Lady Crimson's perfect features. Your Majesty, get out of my sight. All of you. They fled. The nobles who'd laughed at Brilliant's terror scattered like leaves before a storm, desperate to escape the king's wrath. Within seconds, the courtyard was empty except for Brown and the girl in his arms. His girl. Brilliant's eyes were starting to close, shock and injury pulling her toward unconsciousness. But she fought it, staring up at him with an expression he couldn't read. Why? She whispered, echoing Crimson's question. They said you hated humans. Brown looked down at her, at this soft-spoken girl who'd endured weeks of torture without breaking, who'd gone into danger because she wanted so desperately to belong. Something in his chest ached, not pain exactly, but the ghost of emotions he'd thought long dead. I lied, he said simply. To everyone. Including myself. I don't understand. Her voice was fading, consciousness slipping away despite her efforts. I know. He started walking toward the palace, carrying her as if she was the most important burden he'd ever borne. Sleep now. I'll explain everything when you wake. Promise? The word was barely a breath. I promise. Brilliant's eyes finally closed, her head coming to rest against his chest, right over the heart that had started beating differently the moment he'd seen her. Behind them, whispers would already be spreading through the palace like wildfire. The king had saved a human. Had threatened nobles for her. Had held her like something treasured. Everything had changed. And King Brown found he didn't care about the chaos that would follow. Let them whisper. Let them question. He'd spent centuries being what everyone expected, the cruel king, the heartless predator. But this girl in his arms had awakened something he'd forgotten existed. And he would burn the entire palace down before he let anyone hurt her again. Brilliant woke to silk. Not the rough cotton sheets of her tiny chamber, but silk so fine it felt like water against her skin. She opened her eyes slowly, her body aching in strange places, memories of cold shadow touch making her flinch. The ceiling above her was painted with constellations, real gold leaf forming intricate star maps she'd only seen in ancient texts. Crystal chandeliers caught the firelight, scattering rainbow fractals across walls hung with tapestries that looked centuries old. This wasn't her room. This was somewhere she had no right to be. You're awake. Brilliant's head turned sharply toward the voice and pain lanced through her neck. She gasped, and immediately he was there, King Brown, moving from a chair by the window to her bedside in the space between heartbeats. Don't move too quickly. His hand hovered near her shoulder, not quite touching, as if he wasn't sure he had permission. The shades took more from you than blood. They feed on life force itself. You need rest. Where am I? Her voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. My chambers. He said it simply, as if it wasn't the most shocking thing she'd heard in her life. Brilliant tried to sit up despite his warning, and this time his hands did touch her, one at her back, one steadying her arm, helping her ease against the mountain of pillows. His touch was careful, controlled, but she felt the tremor in his fingers before he pulled away. No human has ever been in the royal quarters, she said, looking around at the impossible luxury surrounding her. They'll say. I don't care what they say. Brown returned to his chair, putting distance between them, but his eyes never left her face. In the firelight, they were dark amber threaded with gold, not the crimson she remembered from the courtyard. Almost human. Almost. Why am I here? You could have taken me to the healing ward. I couldn't. The words came out strained, like an admission torn from somewhere deep. I tried. I made it halfway down the corridor before I had to turn back. The thought of leaving you with strangers, of not being able to see you breathing, to know you were safe. He stopped, jaw clenching. It was intolerable. Brilliant stared at him, trying to reconcile the fierce king from the courtyard with the man before her now, sitting in shadows, looking almost vulnerable. I don't understand any of this. They said you despised humans. I said I despised humans. Brown leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. I've said it for decades. Centuries, perhaps. I believed it. Humans were weak, temporary, beneath notice. And then you arrived. I'm nothing special. I'm exactly what they say, weak, pathetic. Stop. The command was soft, but absolute. Don't use their words for yourself. They're true. They're lies. Brown stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The moonlight painted him in shades of silver and shadow. You want truth? I felt your pain from across the palace. Not heard your scream, felt it, like a blade between my ribs. I was in council, discussing trade agreements, and suddenly I couldn't breathe, because somewhere you were terrified. Brilliant's heart hammered against her ribs. That's not possible. No, it shouldn't be. He turned back to her, and his eyes were glowing faintly now, that strange crimson gold that had nothing to do with normal vampire power. Your scent calls to something ancient in me. Something I inherited from my mother's bloodline, not my father's. Your mother was not a vampire. The confession hung in the air between them. My father was a vampire lord. My mother was an alpha werewolf. Their union was forbidden, impossible, and yet I exist. A hybrid. The court knows what I am, but they pretend not to. It's easier that way. Understanding dawns slowly. That's why your eyes. Gold and crimson. Wolf and vampire. Two halves that should tear each other apart but instead create something stronger. He moved closer, drawn despite himself. The vampire in me craves you, Brilliant. Your blood calls to me like no others has in 500 years. But it's not hunger, not the way you think. It's need. To be near you. To know you're safe. And the wolf, she whispered. Brown stopped at the edge of the bed, his hands gripping the footboard hard enough that the wood creaked. The wolf recognizes you. My wolf side has been dormant for decades, buried beneath vampire control. But the moment you walked through the palace doors, it woke up. And it looked at you and knew. Knew what? That you're mine. The words were raw, helpless. My wolf has already claimed you. Mate. The concept is absolute in wolf culture. One person, one soul connection. No choice, no negotiation. The wolf knows its mate, and nothing can change it. Brilliant's breath caught. That's impossible. I'm human. I know. Brown laughed, but there was no humor in it. A human queen? The court would revolt. The noble houses would call for my abdication. Every supernatural realm would see it as weakness. It's unthinkable. Dangerous. It would destroy everything I've built. Then why tell me? Because I can't stay away. The admission seemed to cost him. I've tried. For 3 weeks I watched you suffer and told myself not to interfere. That you were just another human, that this pull would fade. but it only grows stronger. Every day, every hour. He circled the bed slowly, drawn by invisible threads. When he reached her side, he knelt so they were eye level. His hand lifted, trembling, hovering near her cheek. "May I?" His voice was rough velvet. Brilliant couldn't speak, could only nod. His fingertips brushed her cheekbone, featherlight, and she felt the touch everywhere, a cascade of heat that had nothing to do with fever. His thumb traced the curve of her jaw, learning her features like scripture. "Your heartbeat," he murmured, eyes locked on hers. "I can hear it. Racing. Are you afraid?" No. The truth surprised her. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt safe for the first time since entering the palace. "You should be." His hand cupped her face fully now, calloused palm warm against her skin. "I'm a monster, Brilliant. I've killed. I've done terrible things. And right now I want you so badly it's taking everything I have not to." He stopped himself, jaw clenched, and pulled away. Stood. Put distance between them with visible effort. "Not to what?" Brilliant heard herself ask. Brown's eyes met hers, burning with intensity. "Not to claim you completely. To mark you so thoroughly that every creature in this palace knows you're under my protection. To keep you here where I can see you, touch you, know you're safe." He dragged a hand through his hair. "But that would be selfish. Dangerous. You deserve better than a king who doesn't know how to be gentle. You're being gentle now. Because it's you." The words were barely audible. "With anyone else, I don't have to try. But with you, all I want is to be soft. To be worthy of the way you looked at me in the courtyard, like I was something more than the monster they whisper about." Brilliant's chest ached with emotions she couldn't name. "What happens now?" "I don't know." Brown moved to the window again, drawn by restless energy he couldn't contain. "The bond grows stronger every moment we're together. Soon, I won't be able to hide it. The court will notice. Questions will be asked. And if they try to hurt me again?" He turned, and his expression was terrifying in its absolute certainty. "Then I'll show them exactly what kind of monster I can be." They stared at each other across the room, human and hybrid, impossible and inevitable. The fire crackled. Outside, the moon climbed higher. And neither of them knew that Lady Crimson stood in the corridor beyond, ear pressed to the door, a cruel smile spreading across her perfect face. The king had a weakness now. And weaknesses were meant to be exploited. 3 days after waking in the king's chambers, Brilliant returned to her duties with the naive hope that perhaps things might be different. They were worse. The whispers followed her everywhere now, sharper and more vicious than before. She'd been seen leaving the royal quarters. The king had carried her there himself. He'd threatened nobles for her sake. The rumors multiplied with each telling, growing more scandalous, more impossible. The human whore thinks she can seduce the king. Pathetic. As if someone like him would truly want something like her. She probably threw herself at those blood shades on purpose. A desperate ploy for attention. Brilliant kept her head down, focusing on her work in the healing ward. She ground herbs with trembling hands, prepared poultices, assisted the senior healers with their patients. She pretended not to hear the cruel laughter that erupted whenever she entered a room. But pretending didn't make it hurt less. She hadn't seen King Brown since that night in his chambers. Part of her was relieved. The intensity between them had been overwhelming, frightening in its power. But another part, a part that grew stronger each day, ached for his presence. For the safety she'd felt in his arms. She told herself she was being foolish. Kings didn't truly care about human healers. Whatever had happened was an aberration, a moment of weakness he surely regretted. She was still trying to convince herself of this when they found her. It was late evening. The healing ward was empty, the senior healers retired to their quarters. Brilliant was alone, cataloging newly arrived supplies in the storage room, when she heard the door lock click behind her. She turned to find 5 vampire nobles blocking her exit. Lady Crimson stood at their center, her ice blue eyes glittering with malicious triumph. "Hello, pet. We need to have a conversation." Brilliant's heart dropped. "I'm working. If you need healing services, you can return during." "We don't need healing." A male vampire, Lord Sable, moved to flank her other side. "We need you to understand your place." They formed a circle around her, predators cornering prey. Brilliant backed against the shelves, glass bottles rattling behind her. "The king may have been temporarily distracted by you," Lady Crimson said, stepping closer. "But his interest will fade. It always does. And when it does, you'll have made enemies of everyone who matters in this court." "I haven't done anything wrong." Brilliant hated how small her voice sounded. "I just want to complete my training. You humiliated us." Lord Sable's hand shot out, gripping her arm hard enough to make her gasp. "Made the king threaten us over human trash. That requires correction. Let me go." Brilliant tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. "Or what? You'll scream." Another vampire laughed. "The king isn't here to save you this time. He's in the Southern Territories, dealing with border disputes. He won't even know you're dead until he returns." "Dead." The word hung in the air like a blade. "You're going to have an accident," Lady Crimson explained pleasantly. "A fall from the ramparts, perhaps. Or maybe you'll ingest the wrong herb, so tragic, a healer poisoning herself. These things happen." Terror clawed up Brilliant's throat. They were serious. She could see it in their eyes, smell it in the predatory satisfaction rolling off them in waves. "Please." The word came out broken. "Please don't." Lord Sable's other hand rose toward her throat. And the world exploded. The temperature plummeted so fast that frost formed on every surface. The wall shook. Glass bottles shattered, raining crystal shards that hung suspended in midair, frozen by power so immense it had physical presence. Then he was there. King Brown materialized between Brilliant and the nobles with such speed that the displaced air created a shockwave. But it wasn't just his speed that made them stumble backward. It was the aura rolling off him in suffocating waves. Vampire shadows erupted from his body, writhing tendrils of darkness that blocked out the lamplight. But woven through those shadows was something else, golden light that pulsed with raw dominance, ancient and absolute. Werewolf alpha power, the kind that commanded submission from every lesser predator. His eyes blazed crimson gold, brighter than Brilliant had ever seen them. When he spoke, his voice carried the layered quality of both wolf and vampire, two natures speaking as one. "You dare." It wasn't a question. It was a condemnation. The vampire nobles tried to stand their ground. Lord Sable opened his mouth to speak, to explain or defend or lie. He didn't get the chance. Brown's hybrid aura intensified, pressing down with crushing force. One by one, the nobles' knees buckled. They fought it, centuries-old vampires with power of their own, but against the full weight of Brown's true nature, they were nothing. Lady Crimson was the last to fall, pride warring with survival instinct. When she finally hit the ground, her expression was pure hatred. "Your Majesty," she gasped. "We were merely threatening to kill her." Brown's words were glacial. "I heard every word. Smelled your intent. Did you truly think I'd left the palace?" "You were supposed to be in the Southern Territories," Lord Sable said, confusion breaking through his fear. "I couldn't leave." Brown didn't look at them. His eyes found Brilliant, still pressed against the shelves, shaking. "The bond wouldn't let me. I made it to the gates before the need to return became unbearable. So I've been here, watching, waiting for one of you to be stupid enough to try exactly this." He moved then, turning his back on the kneeling nobles to face Brilliant. His hands rose slowly, giving her time to refuse, before gripping her waist and pulling her against his body. The contact was electric. Brilliant's hands instinctively pressed against his chest, feeling the dual heartbeat beneath, one fast and hot like a wolf's, one slow and eternal like a vampire's. "Look at me," Brown commanded softly. She did. His face was inches from hers, all sharp angles and barely contained violence. But his hands on her waist were gentle, protective, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him from tearing the room apart. "She belongs to me." His voice carried through the chamber like thunder, ensuring everyone heard. "Not as a pet. Not as prey. Not as some temporary fascination." He paused, And Brilliant saw the decision forming in his eyes the moment he stopped fighting what he was and accepted the truth that terrified him. She is mine. My mate. Chosen by the wolf in me and claimed by the vampire. Attack her again, threaten her again, speak one more cruel word. His aura flared brighter, forcing the nobles to press their faces to the floor. And I will end you. Not imprisonment. Not exile. Death. Slow, painful, and absolute. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Someone had obviously alerted others because vampires crowded the doorway now, witnessing the impossible. The king had just claimed a human. This is madness, Lady Crimson hissed from the floor. The court will never accept. Then the court can burn. Brown's arms tightened around Brilliant. I am your king. I have led you for 5 centuries. I have bled for this realm, killed for it, sacrificed everything for it. And now I'm telling you that this human, this soft-spoken girl you've tormented and mocked, matters more to me than any of your approval. Brilliant felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Not from fear this time, but from something far more overwhelming. No one had ever defended her like this. No one had ever made her feel like she mattered, like her existence was worth protecting. Brown must have felt her tears because he finally looked down at her, his fierce expression softening into something achingly tender. Don't cry, he murmured, one hand leaving her waist to cup her face. His thumb brushed away her tears with impossible gentleness. You're safe. I swear to you you're safe. Why? She whispered, aware that dozens of vampires could hear them but unable to stop herself from asking. Why would you risk everything for me? Because the alternative is unthinkable. He pressed his forehead to hers, his eyes closing briefly. A world where you don't exist, where you're not safe, where I can't feel your heartbeat and know you're alive, that's not a world I want to rule. Behind them, whispers erupted like wildfire. Shock. Outrage. Disbelief. Some vampires fled, no doubt racing to spread the news throughout the palace. Others stayed, staring in fascination at their king holding a human like she was more precious than his crown. Brown ignored them all. His world had narrowed to the girl in his arms, still crying, still trembling, but also leaning into him like she'd finally found shelter from a storm she'd been weathering alone. What happens now? Brilliant asked against his chest. Now? Brown's smile was sharp and dangerous. Now they learn what it means to cross me. And you. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. You move into the royal quarters permanently. Under my protection. Where I can keep you safe. The court will revolt. Let them try. His certainty should have been frightening. Instead, Brilliant felt something inside her settle into place, like a puzzle piece finding its home after a lifetime of not fitting anywhere. She belonged to a king. And somehow, impossibly, a king belonged to her. The blood moon rose like a crimson eye over the palace, bathing the grand courtyard in light the color of fresh wounds. Every supernatural creature of significance had gathered for the festival, vampire lords in their ancient finery, werewolf alphas draped in furs and silver, fey nobility with their unsettling beauty, and representatives from a dozen other realms. The blood moon came once every decade, a night when alliances were forged and grievances settled under the watchful gaze of the ancestors. It was the most important political event in the supernatural world. And King Brown had summoned them all to witness something unprecedented. Brilliant stood beside him on the raised dais, acutely aware of thousands of eyes fixed upon her. She wore a gown he'd had made for her. Deep sapphire silk that brought out the warmth in her skin, far finer than anything she'd owned in her life. But no amount of beautiful clothing could disguise what she was. Human. Fragile. Utterly out of place among immortal predators. The whispers were deafening even in their quietness. Why is the human here? Perhaps he means to make an example of her. Show us what happens when mortals presume too much. About time. The girl has been a disruption since she arrived. Lady Crimson stood in the front row of nobles, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes gleaming with anticipation. She expected vindication tonight. They all did. Surely the king would come to his senses, would recognize the impossibility of what he'd claimed in a moment of passion. Surely he would send the human away and restore proper order. Brown stepped forward, his presence commanding instant silence. He wore formal regalia, black and crimson, with the ancient symbols of his bloodline embroidered in silver thread. His crown sat heavy on his dark hair, a circlet of twisted metal that had adorned the heads of vampire kings for millennia. He looked every inch the fearsome ruler from legend. "You know why I've called you here," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the courtyard. "Rumors have spread throughout every realm. Questions have been raised about my judgment, my fitness to rule." Murmurs of agreement. Some nobles straightened, scenting blood in the water. "You question my choice to defend a human, to claim her under my protection." Brown's eyes swept the crowd, crimson gold in the blood moon's light. "You think this makes me weak? It makes you compromised, your majesty." Lord Sable spoke from the crowd, emboldened by the number of witnesses. "A king cannot afford sentiment, especially not for what?" Brown's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Say it. For a human? For someone you deem beneath notice." Brilliant's hands trembled. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the stone and escape this public humiliation. This was it, the moment he would realize the cost was too high, that she wasn't worth the political chaos her presence caused. Then Brown did something that stopped every heart in the courtyard. He knelt. The most feared supernatural king alive, ruler of the vampire realm for 5 centuries, hybrid-born of forbidden union, descended to one knee before a human girl. Gasps rippled through the crowd like shockwaves. Brown reached for Brilliant's hand. She was too stunned to pull away. His fingers wrapped around hers, warm, steady, certain, and he lifted her hand to his lips. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was reverent, tender, the gesture of a knight to his lady rather than a king to his subject. When he spoke, his voice rang with absolute authority. "You looked down on her, called her weak, pathetic, human trash." His eyes never left Brilliant's face, but his words were for the assembled crowd. "You mocked her for being soft-hearted, for showing kindness in a court that had forgotten what kindness looked like. You thought her beneath you." He rose slowly, still holding her hand, and turned to face his court. "But she is the one chosen for me. Not by politics or alliance or strategic advantage. By fate. By blood. By the ancient laws that govern what I am." His hybrid aura began to manifest, shadows and golden light intertwining. My wolf recognized its mate. My vampire claimed its destined companion. 2 halves of my nature, always at war, found peace in her presence. "Your Majesty, please," Lady Crimson started. "I am not finished." The command cracked like a whip. "You will hear this. All of you. Mock her again, threaten her again, show her anything less than the respect due to royalty." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "And I will destroy your entire bloodline. Not just you. Everyone who shares your blood. I will erase your name from history so thoroughly that future generations will never know you existed." Silence. Absolute and terrified. "She is not my weakness." Brown's arm wrapped around Brilliant's waist, pulling her close. "She is my strength. The reason I will be a better king than I was before. Because she reminds me what it means to be merciful. To show compassion. To protect those who cannot protect themselves." He turned her to face him fully, his expression softening into something achingly vulnerable. "Tonight, before all the realms, I claim Brilliant as my queen. Not consort. Not companion. Queen. Equal in authority, in respect, in every way that matters." Brilliant's vision blurred with tears. This couldn't be real. Kings didn't marry humans. It violated every law, every tradition, every logical political calculation. "You're crying again," Brown murmured, wiping her tears with gentle thumbs. "Happy or sad?" "I don't know," she whispered honestly. "Overwhelmed. Terrified. Grateful. You don't have to accept." His voice dropped so only she could hear. "If this is too much, if you want to return to your human territories, I'll ensure your safe passage." I'll give you wealth enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. I won't force this on you." Brilliant looked up at him, this impossible king who'd saved her life, defended her honor, and was now offering her a crown while simultaneously offering her freedom. "What if I'm not strong enough?" she asked. "What if I fail you?" "You won't." His certainty was absolute. "But even if you stumbled, I would catch you. Every single time." Something in her chest cracked open. All her life, she'd been told she wasn't enough. Too soft. Too weak. Too human. But this king, this terrifying hybrid who could level armies, looked at her like she was the strongest person he'd ever known. "Yes," she breathed. "My answer is yes." Brown's smile transformed his face from terrifying to devastating. He lifted her into his arms amid chaos erupting in the courtyard, some nobles shouting outrage, others cheering, still others simply staring in shock. "My queen," he whispered against her hair. And Brilliant, who'd arrived at the palace as a mocked human healer, buried her face against his chest and cried. Because impossible things, she was learning, sometimes came true. The crown was heavier than Brilliant had imagined. Not physically, the delicate circlet of silver and moonstone weighed almost nothing. But the weight of what it represented pressed down on her shoulders like the entire palace had settled there. She stood before the mirror in the royal chambers, her chambers now, though she still couldn't quite believe it, staring at a reflection that looked like a stranger. The sapphire gown had been replaced with ceremonial white, embroidered with symbols she was still learning to recognize. Vampire sigils intertwined with werewolf runes, representing the dual nature of the king she was about to bind herself to. Her hands trembled as she touched the crown resting on her dark hair. "You don't have to wear it yet." Brilliant turned to find Brown leaning against the doorframe, watching her with that intense focus he reserved only for her. He changed into formal robes for the bonding ceremony, black silk that made his crimson gold eyes even more striking. "Everyone's waiting," she said, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "The ceremony should have started 10 minutes ago. They can wait." He crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands settling on her shoulders. "Tell me what you're feeling." Terrified. The admission burst out before she could stop it. "What if I can't do this? What if I'm not enough?" Brown turned her gently to face him. "You are the only person in this entire realm who questions that. Everyone else already knows. They hate me. Some of them, yes." His honesty was brutal, but oddly comforting. "They'll spend years trying to undermine you, to prove you're unworthy. But they feared me before, and now they fear what I'll do to protect you. That fear will keep you safe while you find your footing. That's a terrible basis for ruling. It's a start." His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "The rest, earning their respect, proving your worth, that comes with time. And I'll be beside you every moment. You won't face any of this alone." A knock at the door interrupted them. "Your Majesties," came a servant's nervous voice. "The court has assembled." Brown's eyes never left Brilliant's face. 5 more minutes." "But Your Majesty." "I said 5 minutes." The command was absolute. Footsteps retreated hastily. Brilliant managed a weak laugh. "You can't keep terrorizing the servants every time I have doubts. Watch me." But his expression softened. "The bonding ceremony will change you, Brilliant. Not drastically, you'll still be human at your core. But the magic will enhance you, give you some protection in a court full of predators." "Are you ready for that?" She'd read about royal bonds in the ancient texts. They were rare, sacred, meant to tie a ruler's magic to their consort's soul. But those ceremonies had always involved 2 supernatural beings of similar power. No one knew what would happen when hybrid magic touched a human heart. "What if it hurts me?" she whispered. "It won't. I won't let it." Brown's certainty was fierce. "The bond will be gentle because I'm gentle with you. It will give, not take. Enhance, not destroy. You can't know that." "Yes, I can. Because I die before I let anything harm you, including my own power." The raw truth in his voice steadied something in her chest. Brilliant took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and nodded. "Okay, I'm ready." The throne room had been transformed. Thousands of candles lined the walls, their flames reflected in the polished black marble. the assembled court stood in silent rows. Vampire nobles, werewolf representatives, and dignitaries from every supernatural realm. Their faces ranged from curious to hostile to carefully neutral. Lady Crimson stood near the front, her expression a mask of forced civility. But Brilliant caught the hatred flickering in her ice-blue eyes and knew this wasn't over. Some battles took years to resolve. Brown led her to the center of the room where an ancient circle had been inscribed in silver and gold. The symbols glowed faintly, responding to his presence. "Kneel with me," he murmured. They knelt facing each other within the circle. Brown took both her hands in his, and the moment their skin touched, the symbols blazed brighter. "The royal bond is sacred," he began, his voice carrying through the chamber. "It binds not just lives but souls. Magic to magic, heart to heart, until death parts us." He paused, his eyes searching hers one last time. "This is your final chance to refuse. Say the word, and I'll end the ceremony. No shame, no judgment." Brilliant's throat tightened. She could walk away. Return to her human life, safe and small and ordinary. Never face the cruelty of vampire politics or the weight of a crown. But she'd also never feel this again, the way Brown looked at her like she was his entire world. The safety of his arms. The impossible truth that someone as powerful as him had chosen someone as ordinary as her. "I don't want to refuse," she said clearly. "I want this. I want you." Something flashed in Brown's eyes, relief, joy, possessive satisfaction. His grip on her hands tightened. "Then let it begin." The magic rose from him in waves, crimson vampire power mixed with golden werewolf energy, swirling around them like a storm given form. Brilliant gasped as it touched her, expecting pain. Instead, she felt warmth. The magic wrapped around her gently, carefully, like Brown's own hands learning the shape of her. It sank into her skin, her bones, her very essence, but it didn't consume. It enhanced. Her senses sharpened. Suddenly she could hear every heartbeat in the room, smell the complex mixture of supernatural scents, see with crystal clarity in the candlelit dimness. But it wasn't overwhelming. The magic filtered it all through her human perspective, giving her power without drowning her in it. A soft glow began to emanate from her skin, luminous and ethereal. Not bright enough to hurt, just enough to mark her as something more than she'd been. And beneath it all, she felt him. Brown's presence in her mind, her heart, her soul. Not intrusive, but constant, a golden thread connecting them that she knew could never be severed. "The bond is complete," Brown announced, his voice rough with emotion. Brilliant is now queen of the vampire realm, consort to the hybrid king, protected by ancient magic and bound to my soul. He rose and pulled her up with him. The crown on her head caught the candlelight, sending rainbow refractions across the walls. The court knelt as one. Even Lady Crimson bent her knee, though her expression promised future schemes. Brilliant stared at the sea of bowed heads, unable to process that they were bowing to her. The girl they'd called human trash. The weak healer they'd tormented and mocked. "Breathe," Brown murmured against her ear. "You're doing perfectly. I haven't done anything yet. You survived them. You survived me." His arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her close against his body in full view of the entire court. "That's more than enough." He turned her to face him, one hand cupping her face with infinite tenderness. The gesture was intimate, protective, and absolutely unmistakable in its message. This human was his. Completely. Irrevocably. "Let them mock," he whispered, though his words carried through the silent chamber. "Let them scheme and plot and whisper about how wrong this is. You're mine. My queen. My heart. The other half of my soul. And I will burn this entire realm to ash before I let anyone take you from me." Brilliant's eyes filled with tears, happy ones this time, overflowing with emotion too big to contain. "I love you," she whispered back. "I don't know when it happened, but I do." Brown's smile was devastating. "I know. I felt it through the bond the moment you thought it." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I've loved you since the night in the courtyard, when you looked at me with terror and trust in equal measure. When you let me hold you despite every reason you had to fear me." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. The court remained kneeling, witnessing the impossible made real. When they finally pulled apart, Brilliance stood taller. The crown no longer felt quite so heavy. The glow beneath her skin pulsed with steady light. She was human still, yes, but she was also more. Queen. Protected. Loved. And as Brown led her from the throne room, his hand never leaving hers, Brilliant realized that belonging didn't mean fitting into someone else's world. Sometimes it meant having someone powerful enough to reshape the world around you. The vampires who'd mocked her now bowed. The nobles who'd threatened her now feared her king's wrath. And the girl who'd arrived at the palace trembling and alone walked out with a crown on her head and a hybrid king's heart in her keeping. The moonlight caught her crown as they stepped onto the balcony overlooking the realm. Brown wrapped both arms around her waist from behind, pulling her back against his chest. "My queen," he murmured into her hair. "My impossible, perfect queen." Brilliant leaned into him, feeling the dual heartbeat beneath her shoulders. Vampire and wolf, eternal and wild, both beating in perfect synchronization. "Forever?" she asked softly. "Forever," he promised. And beneath the blood moon's crimson glow, the hybrid king and his human queen stood together. Proof that, even in a world of immortal predators and ancient magic, the most powerful force was still the bond between two hearts that refused to be separated.